Hi, this is Russ Titleman, and you're listening to Fab4Free4All.
Larry, welcome to the Fab4Free4All. We just talked to Nigel Sinclair, and this is the quote he said about you. He was the hero of the show because of your insights into the tour and the material that you supplied. What was some of the stuff that you brought to the table that he's praising you about?
Well, I think it goes back to before we did our interview. I put together a little memorandum on what I thought were the pivotal points of the tour in terms of newsmaking, besides the fact that they became the greatest band in the world. And they followed up the questions that I outlined for them. And I have to tell you something. I spent a lot of hours with these folks, especially a remarkable supervising producer, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But I have to tell you something. I never imagined that I would be utilized as much as I was in this film. And then I go back to the original reasons why I didn't want to do the trip in the first place, and which you, of course, know about. And I look back, and I always say to young journalists, students today, never turn down an assignment, ever. So it was a great experience working with them, and I appreciate Nigel's remarks, but this is a film created by a lot of people, and Mark Ambrose, the supervising producer, has been just a delight to work with. And Nigel, and meeting Ron Howard was just the best, and just a lot. And Scott Pascucci, who was involved with this, it's just a great team. And they did their research and they stuck to it, and they are right. They're spot on with an event that changed the world, and through the success, the ups and downs, and the poignancy. It was really great to be part of this project.
You had said in the movie, it says, you talked about the Beatles were considered a menace to society, and even you said, why would I want to do something where the Beatles would be here in October and gone in November? What changed for you? When did that sentiment change for you while you were on the tour? And I must say, obviously, you were on the 64 tour, 65, and part of 66, so you were one of the luckiest people in the world. But when did that sentiment change where you knew that they were not just going to be a one-night stand, so to speak, a fly-by-night group?
Well, even though I was 21 years old, I think I had a pretty good fix on human beings and events. And I guess it came around Los Angeles and the Hollywood Bowl when I looked up at the stars that night and the fading sunlight in the backdrop, and I just heard their music so clearly. And I realized that all this sensational emotion, this outpouring of excitement by young people, mostly girls at the time, was something that I'd never seen before in my life. My mother never mentioned it with Frank Sinatra. Elvis was gigantic, but we never had 20,000 people coming out and screaming their lungs out. And I realized that there was some cultural shift happening, especially with several things that I watched. One was the fact that back in the 1950s, when I was in high school, it was unheard of for young women to express their emotions in public. Just unheard of. The second factor was this stare that I saw on the parts of these fans, that every one of them was convinced that one of them was singing to them. They really honestly thought that. They believed that. In fact, there's a part of the film where a well-known person talks about that. And the third and most decisive turning point for me was listening to their music night after night after night, and realizing that whoever these guys were and whatever they had created with their incredible manager and George Martin and the people who supported them in Liverpool, that they were truly changing an entire generation of people. And I saw in that day the beginning of what would become a decade of tremendous change. And also, I got a lot of critiques, guys, from, and you may remember this, when in my first book, Ticket to Ride, I mentioned that I saw a definitive correlation between the arrival of the Beatles and the arrival of the anti-war movement 4 years later. Same kids who were screaming for them in the Cow Palace, in Denver, at Barstow Stadium in New York, were on the picket lines and protest lines 4 years later. Some of them were at war. And it was just an amazing thing. But the one moment to me was that night at the Hollywood Bowl in 1964 when I watched what they did and I saw what was happening.
Wow.
Larry, I've interviewed you a couple of times, and one of the things I've always noticed is that a lot of your interviews have been either leased or put out as interview discs. As a matter of fact, Ticket to Ride had a whole hour CD of your interviews. But I've always asked what happened to the actual reports. And in the movie, we actually hear some of those reports. Now, where did they turn up? Because you said you hadn't found them at the time. Where did they turn up to be heard in the movie?
Well, I had some,
okay,
but it shocked me how they found these interviews. First of all, I had some on some very old tapes that disintegrated. I had some that were actually transferred over to DVD, CD. And what shocked me was that some of the sound bites they had of me doing my play-by-play, I didn't remember them.
Wow.
I said, did I say that? Did I really say that? I had discovered that this might be a generational change or a culture change that would affect generations to come. It was just amazing. But it was my voice, so I know it was me. And I also believe that there was a lot of my material that was absconded and used on all these different albums all over the place by different people. And some of them came from stations that were on a network that we ran of about 45 stations nationwide.
Oh, okay.
So I was kind of shocked. When my wife and I were invited to a screening in New York,
Yes.
and I walked into the place, and I met Ron Howard for the first time, and believe me, he's as approachable and as relaxed and as confident as he seems. He's just a really nice man.
Wow.
And he came over to me and gave me a big handshake. He said, Larry Kane, it's so nice to meet you. I said, how do you know me? He said, well, you're in a lot of the picture. I've been looking at your face for a long time. And so I was very surprised, and I was very thrilled, to be very honest with you, working on this project. I've seen war and peace and conflict. I've covered a great city here in Philadelphia and part of New York for a little bit, too. And I've covered Middle East peace conferences and hostilities and war and peace and presidents. And this adventure that I didn't even know was going to be so great turned out to be one of the highlights of my career, if not the highlight. And being part of this project brings it full circle.
Larry, you became, I guess, very friendly with John Lennon because you actually asked intelligent questions of not just John, but the whole band. And they picked up on that. It wasn't like, you were talking about their haircuts or when you're going to get another haircut. When did you realize that you were going to have a better conversation with the band than maybe some of the other reporters who were traveling with the band at the time?
Well, it's quite by accident because I asked them questions. My bosses insisted that a DJ not go, and I didn't want to go at all. I thought it'd be best to send a DJ who knew more about the music. And the thought behind their dispatching me, was that I would be able to provide stories, news stories, that I had a sense of news. So from the get-go, I started asking them questions about the immigration crisis in Britain, about racial tensions starting to really develop in the United States, about their own philosophies of life, about their bringing up. And I think that the wildest question I asked him the first night was to John Lennon. I said, if you had a teenage daughter, of course you're too young for that, but if you had a teenage daughter, would you let her go to the concert tomorrow night at the Cow Palace? He said, absolutely not. Are you kidding? And they were just newsmakers. I mean, you talk to Ringo Starr, who people would look at in the back of the band as a jovial, happy-go-lucky guy, who happened to be one of the most serious people on the planet. And I'd say second to John, he was very, very involved in political thought, philosophy, the right and wrong of rich not helping poor. And so he was a surprise. And frankly, all of them were. McCartney made some comments right after after I told them that the Jacksonville Gator Bowl was going to be segregated. And this is major part of the movie, where the filmmakers absolutely find somebody, and they bring the story to light in a very human way. And when McCartney spoke out, I mean, there wasn't a pause between the time I mentioned it and the thing he said. We're not doing it.
Yeah,
And then the others chimed in. I mean, in unison, we're not going to do that. And I was stunned. I mean, I think Brian Epstein was apoplectic because he was trying to figure out how to handle this business-wise. But he understood the problem, and he knew what they were going to do, and they were going to do it. And there was no way they were going to walk into that place if it was segregated. And their explanation of tolerance was extraordinary because they came from a town that had a lot of issues when it came to Catholics and Protestants and blacks and whites. And whatever they were born with and whatever they grew up with, they overcame it.
It's funny because you realize that they were 21, 22, 24, and there's these guys who are, their first big tour of America, and they could have easily acquiesced and just said, okay, because they wanted to be famous, but it seemed like they knew what they wanted right from the beginning.
Well, I would say that, there were people who say the press played them, because most of the press was in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And my parents, my mother, who died some weeks before the tour, had said from the first time she saw them at Ed Sullivan, they're going to be big. They're going to be big. When she found out I was going to travel with them, she said, this is going to be the biggest thing that ever happened in your life.
Wow.
And that's also the night she predicted I would be a TV anchor, which to me was a joke.
But it came true,
It came. I watched you on ABC.
So when you look at that period and you understand how their convictions, it was pretty amazing. I mean, here we were in the middle of a great debate in 1965 and 1966 about a war that had divided the American people. Not as much as we're divided right now, but pretty well divided. And they were not afraid to take a point of view, much to the chagrin of Brian. Now, there was an interesting picture in the movie, and a picture that was one of my small collection of pictures that were taken with my Instamatic camera. See how smart I was? I knew it was going to be such a big story that I brought a junky little camera with me. And in the picture, if you look closely, you'll see John Lennon holding up a magazine, Ebony magazine, and the headline said, this is 1965, post-Detroit riots. And the headline says, the white problem in America. They just were not afraid to take jabs at the country that they were in. And of course, they were rewarded in 1966 with the alleged statement that the Beatles were bigger than Christ, which was really never said.
Right.
Their records being burned by mostly Southern DJs, and they got a taste of tough side of America.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because not the Jesus remark yet, but the gradual changing of the Beatles, even though, again, we're talking about early 20s. You had mentioned in the film that 1965, let's just call it what it is, marijuana came into the picture, and they were high a lot, but how did it affect them? I mean, it didn't seem to affect them for their music while they were live on stage, but how did it affect everything else around the tour?
I would say that the use of marijuana in 1965 was a minor sidelight. I don't think it really affected much at all.
Right.
I think that their lives may have been affected later on, in 67 and 68 after going to India, and perhaps experimenting with other substances.
Right.
But I didn't see it as a big deal. They still drank as much liquor as they drank. Liverpudlians are famous for being able to down a couple of beers.
That's true.
I didn't see that. What I saw, the change in 65, was a maturation where they realized, well, we've taken this country, let's enjoy it. And I think that the apex of their joy of touring came in the summer of 1965. I would say that later on in 66, the few times I traveled with them, they were not as thrilled about traveling. They were a little nervous about security. They just, I think, had pretty well had it. And one of the things that people do not know about them is the amazing discipline they had in their performance. They didn't do sound checks like a lot of people do today, but they went out every night with this really very pittance of sound equipment, and they made beautiful music. One DJ, a guy named Paul Drew in Atlanta, actually rigged the stadium with sound all over the place. So you had your first taste of stereo. So it was at Fulton County Stadium. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but the Beatles played Fulton County Stadium before the Atlanta Braves played there.
That's true. And also, if you hear the bootlegs of that show, you can hear John saying, "I hear myself." He keeps saying it because he's so shocked that the sound was so good there.
It was beautiful.
Yeah. Larry, your book, Ticket to Ride, basically, if you think about it, is your version, your writing of the forthcoming 8 Days a Week book in many ways.
A film.
A film, I should say. First of all, is the book in print still, and is it going to be re-released?
Well, it's in print by Leonard Press.
Okay.
And which is a music press. It is also available in a unique form. It's been interesting. When I signed the contract to do the book, there were no ebooks. So I made my own. And for those of you, anybody on a budget can get it for just a few bucks online. And it's the whole book read by me with all the interviews. But I'm not taking advantage of this moment.
No, we know.
Not yet anyway. I will say that the movie is really much more than the book. The movie is really about the poignancy of why they stopped touring and why they eventually started to think about not being there. The movie is also about the personalities of the individuals. And what the movie shows, I don't know about you, but I was sort of getting the chills because I felt like I was right there again. And the close-up shots of them together on stage is just, both of you are tremendous Beatle fanatics.
Yeah, I would say.
And I don't know Mitch that well, but Rob, I know you. And you do this podcast now, this broadcast. And, I don't know what you thought of it, but I was stunned by the film.
There are moments that we didn't know about and some footage we hadn't seen either. So we just wish, and we said this to Nigel, that it was longer. And they said they were trying to make a regular movie, not a miniseries. A miniseries, as he said. And
a biopic, a longer film, I think would have been difficult from what I gather from Mark Ambrose, who's the supervising producer, that they were very, very careful about time.
Yeah,
now, I must tell you, I saw the first cut in April, and then I saw the sequence since. And I won't go into detail, but I'll tell you that Ron Howard is a genius. And what he did with the story, because really the film is a book about great storytelling. And the storytelling is provided by the group, the people. There are other people in along with me, and some really great production. And I think this movie is going to do real well. I think it's going to be viewed as a seminal moment in Beatles history. And I'm even appearing tomorrow night at the Phillies-Dodgers game to talk about it because it's Beatles night at Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia. So, but I'm really excited. I'm excited about going to the premiere and reuniting with all my Beatle buddies in England. And for all the books I've done, I've talked to a lot of people over there and made a lot of friends. There's one great thing about the Beatles, above ground and underground. They're a group, the group they grew up with, the people that know them, love them. It's a great group of people. Tony Bramwell, a night with Tony Bramwell is like...
it's like a weekend with Tony Bramwell.
It's like a surreal experience.
Oh, yes. Been there, done that.
He actually stopped a train for me in his town in Devon.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
5 o'clock train was headed for London. It was about to take off, and he stood in front of it.
Tony's a character. He's a really nice guy.
Yeah. Larry, as a reporter on the tour, you were with the Beatles most of the time. It wasn't like you were separated many hours. You were on the same plane. You saw the concerts out, obviously. When did you think that they were your friends? Obviously, it's a business thing, too, but obviously the Beatles remember you down the road. Obviously, going to 75 when John Lennon showed up in Philly for the Helping Hands fundraiser charity event. When did you feel that you were like, friends?
I think I felt that way about 2 or 3 weeks in, but I knew right afterwards when I got an invitation to go to the Bahamas to watch them film Help, and then something happened that I really don't talk about much, but I got a call from Brian Epstein. Brian Epstein called me and said that I was going to be getting a call from Ed Sullivan Productions, and they were doing a 2-camera shoot called The Beatles at Shea Stadium, which is one of the forgotten films of all time. And they asked me if I could do all the interviews before and after. And they paid me the price of $1,500, which to me was it was an awful lot of money.
Sure.
And it actually paid for another semester of college, and to 3 semesters of college, maybe 4 years. So I knew they were friendly with me. I knew they cared about me. I do know that they made a lot of fun of me along the way, but that's just because we were both so different. And I think the fact that I was different, that I wasn't a DJ, or I wasn't the person who kept asking him to do promos for the station.
Right.
Although there were DJs who traveled in and out of the tour, like Jim Stagg of Chicago, who were very, very popular with them. But there were a lot of hangers-on, and everybody wanted a piece of them, and I really didn't want a piece of them. I just wanted to do my job. So I'll tell you something, I learned a lot on the Beatle tours. I learned how to deal with crowds. I've covered since 23 political conventions, and the last one a couple of weeks ago in Philadelphia.
Right.
And after the Beatles, those crowds were nothing. I mean, running through the crowds of people getting trampled on the floor, seeing kids who will simply not be denied. The greatest vision I have, by the way, is in Vancouver, British Columbia, where the seats on the floor of the stadium started collapsing.
Wow.
And 7,000 people ran over them, tripping and falling, legs breaking. And Derek Taylor stood on stage and said, "Get back, get back."
Yeah,
and
it's
they
amazing.
finally continued the concert. So it was, as you know, Rob and Mitch, it was an experience of a lifetime. I'm 3 months younger than Paul McCartney. He'll always be older than me. And so you know my age, and you know how long I've been around. And this movie really, in addition to my consulting work for NBC and my political analysis that I do in this crazy year, this movie has been just an absolute joy. And to have Nigel Sinclair say those things about me makes me feel really good.
We also thought if he hadn't said it, we would have probably said it too.
Because
when you come on the screen and then we start hearing your sound bites and your analysis of the whole thing, it really put it into focus of what was going on, the madness and the craziness of the tours.
When you come on, and we told this to Nigel, no pun intended, the movie, takes off. I mean, I know you're on a plane, but it really does take off, and it focuses exactly on what they're trying to portray. So we appreciate it very much.
And as a collector, I was glad they found the actual reports. It's great to have the interviews, but I'd love to hear the reports because
the only regret I have about the movie is that Ron Howard, with all his talent, couldn't have fixed my face.
Oh, come on.
Please. Don't we all have those regrets?
Well, Larry, we appreciate you coming on our show, and we look forward to the movie, and we have to have you on again to talk. You have 3 books out on the Beatles: Ticket to Ride, Lennon Revealed, and When They Were Boys. So we got to get to some of those books too. So we hope to have you on again down the road.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Any more books, by the way? Is there a 4th book coming? Beatle book?
No.
No, okay, just check.
Fab4Free4All was edited and produced by Tony Chiguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York. The opening and closing theme is Not Alone by Barry Waller. Be sure to visit our website at www.fab4free4all.com.